professor.
Our ships and submarine are owned by the Navy,
Yeah,
and I work under long-term contract to
yeah,
operate them.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I have a guy at Office of Naval Research who's a guy I don't want to disappoint.
Right,
So
right, yeah. What muddies the water for me is that I'm a professor, a tenured professor at the War College, and up until a few months ago, it was pretty straightforward. We put on a disclaimer saying not speaking on behalf of the U.S. government. You know, on the other hand, you know, I can't take off my identity and say, you know, I know nothing.
right.
So,
we have this challenge a lot with our scientists who get asked
yeah.
to be expert witnesses.
Yeah,
Because you
yeah,
can't disengage.
yeah. So, you know, these are new times and turbulent waters. And on the other hand, what's the point of not talking about stuff? And, you know, we'll see where it goes. I'm,
We've all been told to kind of talk about
Yeah.
the data
right,
and talk about our jobs
yeah,
as to just gather information, not to comment on
right,
what that means or
sure,
who said what.
yeah.
But
Well,
really,
science is great because, you know, the data, you know, you can stand on that. I teach policy, which is different. And, you know, I come out of the political science field. My day job at the War College is I teach a course, and it's a core course on how the U.S. government makes foreign policy. At the moment, we're all looking at each other, kind of scratching our heads. How do, you know, it beats us. So, you know, you just have to, you know, go where maybe not the data takes you, but where the evidence is, and with your core beliefs. And you know, I'm not going to be obvious about things. What's unclear back home is how much leeway do we actually have, and we know for sure. I mean, DEI is, you know, dead with the stake driven through its heart. You know, don't even. Fine, I don't need to talk about DEI. Climate change, it's very ambiguous right now.
well, I
And
just I can't help but the trips that we make, how the weather keeps changing.
of course,
And the weather's not. This is hard for people to understand. It doesn't mean the weather's getting nicer.
yeah,
The weather's getting harsher.
It's getting more violent, yeah.
Getting more violent.
Yeah,
And-
because
and-
heat is
and-
energy. Yeah.
And when the ice that sort of protected that wave generation or that that landmass or that sort of fetch, when that goes away for a much greater period of time,
But yeah, and you have shallow seas. I mean,
shallow
so
seas build
yeah,
up.
it's just awful.
It's
Yeah,
awful.
yeah.
yeah,
Just from that
yeah,
operation.
because you get a good swell running and it feels the bottom. So wave base is some huge figure, and these are shallow seas. I mean, the Bering Sea is treacherous.
Heads up, I can hear people having a private conversation.
Discussion.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you mean? That is lunch for me. What about second lunch? I eat dinner in my dorm. I do not go to that dinner. But yes, if you need as such, I can take it. All right, Nico, we're good to go. You know how to turn that on? That's fair. Where are you going visiting? Oh, just my house. Oh, late. Oh, no. Yeah, I was not instructed otherwise to shoot dinner, so I leave. I don't like the dinner atmosphere. No, too loud. I don't have my earplugs in yet, so. Hey, it's 3 o'clock, so I think we're green light go, you know.
Friends, fellow mariners, my Nicholas Paulu. My name is Nicholas Paulu, class of 2025. I study oceanography and small vessel operations, and I am part of the Student Government Association Environmental Action Club. On behalf of Maritime Academy, I would like Maine Maritime Academy Climate Symposium. This year, the theme for our event is Maritime Industry in the Arctic, Understanding Change and Impacts. The Arctic is warming and changing faster than any place on Earth. This rapid change leads to increased risk for ecosystems and communities. Geopolitical destabilization and industries vying for economic power. The maritime industry lies in the midst of change in the Arctic, with the potential to respond with sustainable and equitable practices or to exacerbate risk in the region. Today, we have convened an expert panel who can help us untangle these complexities and provide insight into intersections between maritime industry and an Arctic undergoing rapid human-driven climate change. The Maritime Academy Climate Symposium is designed to spark discourse on our campus and across other maritime academies about the ways in which climate change will influence the maritime industry and our future careers and lives as working professionals. We are proud to say the Maritime Academy Climate Symposium emerged out of student interest and continues to be driven by dedicated students to share this knowledge with their community. Our event will include a series of 15-minute talks from 6 expert panelists, 2 in person, representing Arctic research, industry, scientific, legislative, geopolitical, and cultural perspectives. Presentations will be followed by an expert or panel discussion with Q&A. We ask that you please hold your questions for speakers until our panel discussion. And the panel discussion is followed by dinner in the Harborview Room at 1800, 6 p.m., which is located in Alphon Student Center. All are welcome. We would like to extend a sincere thank you to our guest speakers who will help us to unpack these issues surrounding the maritime industry, change, and impact in the Arctic. We would also like to extend a thank you to our audience for your attendance and interest in this symposium, including those of you who have joined virtually and those who joined our Lunch and Learn session earlier today. Finally, I need to mention the MAX planning team, representing a collaboration between, a collaboration between students, staff, and faculty. Thank you, Dr. Carrie Whitaker, Commander Lonnie Christian, Brian Wolf, Chris Argyropoulos, and Campbell Taylor. This could not have been pulled off without all of you. Before we begin, We would like to honor the land here in Castine, acknowledging its place within the authentic history of Turtle Island and the original people of this territory. Today, we gather upon the traditional land of the Wabanaki people who continue to live here and nearby, and who continue to seek equity, justice, and self-determination. We offer this land acknowledgement in the spirit of reconciliation. And now I will turn it over to Lieutenant Lopez.
Now, I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Mary Thompson-Jones. Dr. Thompson-Jones is currently a professor of national security affairs at the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, and is the chair of Women in National Security and Diplomatic Studies. Before coming to the Naval War College, she directed a master's program in global studies and international relations at Northeastern University. Her instruction and practice is informed by a 23-year career as a Foreign Service officer in leadership roles in the Czech Republic, Canada, Guatemala, Spain, and Washington, D.C. She retired with the rank of Minister Counselor. Dr. Thompson-Jones is the author of To the Secretary, Leaked Embassy Cables and America's Foreign Policy Disconnected. In her most recent book, America in the Arctic, Foreign Policy and Competition in the Melting North, Dr. Thompson-Jones explores the United States' long-standing political and diplomatic engagement with Arctic partners. In addition to core courses, she has taught an elective, Imagining the Arctic, and as a member of Newport's Arctic Scholars Initiative, she has presented on Arctic security panels in Denmark, Norway, and Greenland. Dr. Thompson-Jones holds a doctorate in education from the University of Pennsylvania, a master's of arts in law and diplomacy from Tufts University's Fletcher School, and undergraduate degrees in journalism and political science from California State University. We are fortunate to have her with us today to speak on foreign policy and national security in the face of climate change in the Arctic. Students, faculty, and friends of the Academy, please welcome our first speaker and panelist of the 2025 Maritime Academy Climate Symposium, Dr. Mary Thompson-Jones. Ma'am.
Thank you very much. Lovely introduction. Thank you so much. I think we just lost the slides. Oops, there we are. Okay. This is all. Right. Okay. So, since I'm first, I have the privilege of being the first to say thank you. Thank you to the students who organized this and to the faculty who have so ably supported you. I've had a chance to meet several of you today, and it's been absolutely splendid. I also have to say that I'm speaking today in my capacity as a civilian, not a member of the Naval War College, Department of the Navy, or Department of Defense. These comments are my own. I also would like to do a shout out if there are any international students in the audience today. I'm particularly pleased and honored to have the opportunity to speak about the Arctic with the domain. The ways that I've had from my experience as a student of the Arctic is the international flavor that comes to it. An international student, international faculty member, we're having a bit of a moment, and perhaps we are trying your patience. The 23 years I've served as a Foreign Service officer prompt me to insist that bear with us. We do appreciate the allies and partners that we have, and the partnerships that go back so many decades are something that many of us cherish, and I think they're particularly relevant today. All right, so, yes, there we go, the famous disclaimer. So, anyone here have any idea who the gentleman on the right might be? Politician? Floridian? He actually did spend time in Florida, Dayton. Furman College alum. International economist. Journalist. Great golfer. He's all of those things, but that's not why I chose him in the picture. And I think I heard somebody shout out the answer. Who is he? Yes. Very good. You win the prize. So, he was just past weekend at Mar-a-Lago, and here's a tweet that I think symbolizes the importance of the U.S.-Finland relationship. And these are from the words of Commander-in-Chief, President Trump. And yes, he is a good golfer. Glad to know that. But he's talking about the partnership and particularly about something that ought to concern all of you, which is icebreakers. And I'm going to dwell on that a little bit more. Why was President of Finland, Alexander Stubbs, at Mar-a-Lago? He was there because of something that happened before President Trump took office, which is called Ice Pact. Finland was a crucial part of that, and it was signed by Canadian Premier, former Premier Justin Trudeau, former President Joe Biden, and former and current President of Finland, Alexander Stubbs. He was there, Stubbs was there, to ensure that Ice Pact might continue into a new administration. Because one thing that we have seen in the last several months is a lot of the agreements, a lot of the things that were set up have either been set to the side or put on hold or are in question. And this is one that's obviously very important to Finland. I submit it's also very important to the United States. There's a lot of expertise to look at. I'll let you read this, and you all are more expert in maritime issues than I am, but you can see that Finland is a good partner to have. Well, others on the panel know the vessel on the left better than I do, but we all love it down in Newport. New London, Connecticut is a feeder school for us, and we have good relations with it. This is the Healy, and one of the great things about the Healy is that its mission is research-oriented. And it goes different places through the Northwest Passage every year. This is a recent, but not last summer's, map of where the Healy went. What's important about this is that it fulfills an agreement that was made way back when Ronald Reagan and Brian Mulroney, the Canadian former premier, were in office. Canada considers the Northwest Passage to be Canadian waters. The United States disputes that. We say that it's international waters. I'm not an international lawyer. Others are more expert in that than I am. But what I am is the diplomat. And what I love is that President Reagan and Brian Mulroney came together and agreed on what is called a gentleman's agreement. We go up there every year. We think they're international waters. We inform Canada that we're doing this. Canada always says yes. Canada would have very little reason to say no because this is a research vessel. We've done remarkable things with the Healy, and perhaps many of you are aware of it, or maybe some of you have. I'm seeing some nods in the audience, so yes, it's a friend. It's a friendly vessel to look at here. So fast forward. Now, one of the problems with the Healy is that there's just the one of it. We have 2 icebreakers left. One is dedicated to Antarctica, entirely different pole, which I know nothing about. And it's not in good shape. I think it was built about the same time as the US bicentennial, long before you were born, probably before your parents were born. And as the Arctic has changed, we've realized that we need icebreakers, hence Ice Pact that I showed you a few moments ago. Congress appropriated money way back in 2019, the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, said, yeah, we do. Let's have some. Okay, let's build some. We lacked the muscle memory. We've been out of the business of building icebreakers for a very long time. It's not second nature anymore. And there are problems beyond just building icebreakers. We've gone through some changes. We tried talking to our friends in Germany, and they said, yeah, we've got some plans. We can sell them to you, fine. Coast Guard took these, took them off the shelf, and said, well, we need to make modifications. Modifications is not good when you're talking about building ships. Delays, funding issues, more delays. Congressional Budget Office gets involved. There are inquiries. Meanwhile, BT Halter, which was the original shipyard that had the contract in Louisiana, was sold, not the fault of the government, not the fault of the Coast Guard, and it goes to Bollinger, more delays. Bollinger now has the contract, and oh wow, now it's up to almost $1 billion. This is a lot of money for an icebreaker. And when can our friends, the Coast Guard, get this? Maybe in 2030. That's an awful long time to wait. So late? Why so expensive? And a further question is, it's going to be home ported in Juneau, Alaska, but we're getting more than one ultimately, and maybe some of them should be home ported on the East Coast as well. Why not Maine? Icebreakers, as many of you probably know, are just one symptom of a larger problem. We're in the middle of a shipbuilding crisis. I hear about this all the time at the Naval War College because naval officials are hauled before Congress and they are grilled as to, well, what's happened to 350 ship fleet? What's happened to the 291 ship fleet? How many ships do we have? How many ships are far behind? Now, Bath Iron Works, which is in your neighborhood, is part of the effort to do something. They're building Arleigh Burke destroyers. Are they on time? No. Are they under budget? Never. Are they operating with full employment? Of course not. They have the same problems every shipyard in the United States has, which is a dearth of talent, lack of next generation capacity, and on and on. I was joking to people earlier today, all of you students are probably going to walk out of here with more job offers than you can accept because you've got a popular skill set. You're in demand. And there aren't enough of you. We need to clone the school. And so I come from the Naval War College, and it is a joke that you can't do a presentation without Alfred Thayer Mahan. Here's my Alfred Thayer Mahan slide, which is not here just because it's Alfred Thayer Mahan, founder of the Naval War College, but also because it's relevant. And the slide before, in addition to this slide, talk about the linkage between maritime commerce and maritime security. The two go hand in hand. That's one reason I think I was brought up here. We study national security, where I'm from. We don't talk a lot about commercial shipping, but we are intimately familiar with the problems of it. And former Naval Secretary Carlos del Toro, this was his hobby horse. He spent his time in office constantly complaining. He complained to industry. He complained to Congress. Congress complained back. But we're no further along, I don't think. So what is the problem? I mean, this is also a question we often ask ourselves when we're studying national security problems is, what exactly is the problem we're trying to solve? And we talk about the Arctic, climate, yes. Security, yes. Peoples of the Arctic, 4 million of them, yes. There are many angles to this problem. And national leaders have framed the issue through different concepts. Senator King, who I look forward to hearing from in just a few moments, was at a Senate hearing just a few nights ago, and he was talking about how he sees it as a new domain of potential conflict, I imagine he's talking about China as well as Russia. Senator Jack Reed, one of our local senators, is also engaged with this. And over on the Alaska side, we've got Senator Dan Sullivan, who's also seized with the issue. What's the problem? Whose fault is it? Well, plenty of blame to go around. You can blame government, and as a government employee, I'm not telling you anything new when I say that we live from one continuing resolution or CR to the next. We're often frustrated, we're often put on hold because we can't embark on new programs, we can't be as innovative as we like because we're constantly waiting for Congress to take action. Industry would also say there's lack of predictability. Links to the CRs, but it links to other things about Congress as well. Congress is not always clear about what it wants. The procurement system is clearly broken, and that's a separate conference for another day, and you need a whole other group of experts to talk about defense procurement. Other ideas are, well, let's do more production. Let's loosen restrictions on foreign suppliers. The Coast Guard finally was allowed to buy a used icebreaker to tide it over until one is built for it. So little by little, there are cracks opening in the system. The industry has problems too. Shipyards are typically lost leaders, ugly stepchildren. In the case of GD, the Gulfstream is their good child. That's the one that turns amazing profits every year. But because of regulations, they aren't able to rob from Peter to pay Paul, and this frustrates industry's ability to make improvements. Some of it is on them. Shipyard communities are not good places. They're not good places to raise families. People who've served in the Navy talk about it, what it's like to be in a shipyard. Not a good tour for Navy people. Also, failure to recruit. Whose fault is it that we don't have enough labor, enough shipwrights for the next generation? Well, is it industry, is it government, is it both? We can talk about this. So what is the answer? This is my answer. I would go beyond shipbuilding, and I would go beyond my colleagues back in Newport who talk about the Arctic as only a maritime domain. And these are my answers. The first is participation. This is the state of Maine. This is Governor Janet Mills. This is the Arctic Circle. Somebody recently told me Lieutenant Morales Lopez was there at the Arctic Circle. This is a conference that happens every year. This is the value of citizen presence, citizen diplomacy. State of Maine took the largest delegation, any state ever, to the Arctic Circle Conference. They met with international partners from all over the world. They showed the flag. Governor Mills signed contracts with Finland, other partners. This was incredible. State of Maine should be there every single year. I know Senator King has spoken, Senator Murkowski has spoken, others. This is a great way to enhance citizen engagement. This is also Maine. Anyone know where this anonymous-looking room might be? Another college not too far away from you?
Maine?
Good guess? Anybody else? It's Bowdoin. What was happening in Bowdoin is a joint committee, the US, Greenland, Denmark joint committee. This is a diplomatic effort to sit down and talk about joint issues of concern. Some of them are military, others of them are diplomatic, political. It's the whole gamut of things. Through the Joint Committee, State Department has funded Fulbright Arctic Scholars programs. It has funded student exchanges with students in Nuuk at the University of Greenland with several US universities. This is another example of soft power, citizen diplomacy, important ways to deepen our Arctic contacts. The Joint Committee is not a one-off. It happens every 24 months. It's held sometimes in Denmark, sometimes in Greenland, and it was held in the state of Maine back in 2022. Little house on the left, Anybody know what that is? It's in Nuuk, Greenland. This is your U.S. consulate. This is a diplomatic installation. This was reopened, I should say, just a few years ago. And the idea was to engage with the Greenlandic people. Also soft diplomacy. We staff this full-time with a consul, with a public diplomacy officer, and until recently with a USAID small business expert. They work with the Greenlandic communities. They travel a great deal. They help Americans who are traveling through Greenland. When I was there, they were preparing for people who were going up to Summit Station, which is a premier research institution, not maritime, but inland. And for me, this says a lot about the way forward. Nobody wants to be bought and sold. And there are other ways to engage with communities. I think we have done some good work in Greenland. I think there's a great future to continue that work as we go forward. But I would hit hard on the diplomatic aspect of it. Lastly, looking at Portland, we've got a lot of economic development. And what I love about this map is that Portland is the terminus rather than Norfolk, Virginia. AIMSCIP was wooed away from Norfolk, Virginia to the state of Maine. Why? Because a lot of people subscribe to what Senator King has talked about as Maine as an Arctic gateway. And you look at this map and you can see how that is so. At one point, AIMSCIP was also going to make at least one trip a week to Nuuk, Greenland. That's not currently in the offing. Economic rules and conditions govern business decisions. But I'm hoping that it will happen in the future because Greenland would love to open trade avenues with the US, and I think it would be a win-win situation. Building on the right is brand new, also in Portland. It's the new cold storage facility. Huge enterprise designed to help move goods from Europe through Maine and onward into the interior of the US. Another great way to connect us with the Arctic. Lastly, I'm sure my colleagues will talk much more about this, but we have stumbled on to the silliness of trying to conduct research sitting in universities in Virginia or Florida or Minnesota about events in the Arctic without collaborating with Arctic residents and with Arctic peoples who have generational knowledge about climate, about biology, about conditions. And modern researchers have definitely decided that it is in their interest, as well as the people of the Arctic, to collaborate together, to collaborate on research design, to collaborate on data gathering and data interpretation. And this is a new burgeoning field, and one that I think is another example of enlightened engagement in the Arctic. So I'll end with a quote that I love from a colleague in Canada who points out that whatever else happens, it's still a rough domain. It's not going to look like Palm Springs anytime soon. No matter how warm it gets in the Arctic, it's still dark. Unless somebody can figure out how to move it closer to the equator, it's still going to be dark 6 months of the year. It's going to be very dark 3 or 4 months of the year, depending on how far north you are. We're still seeing a lot of storms. We're still seeing weather, and it's still largely uncharted. So with that, I look forward to the second part of this when I can talk to you about your questions and your concerns about the Arctic. And I'll hand off to the next panelist. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson-Jones, for your presentation and insights. I quite liked that. Let's give it up one more time for Dr. Thompson-Jones, please. Our next speaker is Mr. Paul Gallagher, Maine Maritime, 1987. Mr. Gallagher is Director of Ship Operations at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and manages the institution's fleet of research vessels, including the RV Atlantis and the RV Neil Armstrong, which are part of the U.S. academic fleet under the University National Oceanographic Laboratory System. During his 35 years within the maritime industry, Paul Gallagher has been involved in all aspects of vessel operations and commercial contracting. While working afloat, he sailed as a licensed officer in the deck department on container vessels, tank vessels, drill ships, offshore supply vessels, offshore towing vessels. His shoreside assignments have included profit loss management of regional businesses, including tanker escort, ship assist, regional towing, line handling, and heavy lift cargo transportation projects for upstream oil, gas, and mineral extraction clients. Please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, everybody. Give me a second while we change the slides over. All right, thank you, Gary. Well, thanks for the opportunity to be here today. I'm here to talk about what do we think about when we bring ships to the Arctic. I'm very fortunate. I work with a lot of talented people. We have a lot of experience in going to the Arctic, but we're also very fortunate that we have a great group of scientists and government agencies supporting us. So today I'm going to talk about a few things. I'm going to go through my slides fairly quickly, and then I'll answer questions later on. At the end of my slides, there'll be some information about where to look for jobs in oceanography, so feel free to write that stuff down. I want to talk a little bit about these things. I'm not going to read them because I only have a few minutes to talk to you today. So who's Woods Hole? We are a scientific institution, educational institution, much like Maine Maritime. We have about 1,250 employees based down in Cape Cod. My job is to deliver scientists to sea. And we do that by being about 100 years old, and we're a nonprofit organization really tied to dedicated ocean research, exploration, education. Our scientists and the people that support them, the engineers, the technicians, we push the boundaries of knowledge by building tools and equipment and operating our ships. And we take them to all different places in the ocean to reveal the things underneath the seas. I think it's important to define, when we talk about the Arctic, what is the Arctic? So we're all talking about the same thing. So the IMO Polar Code defines the Arctic as anything above 60 degrees north latitude. We also talk about polar waters in Antarctica as being above 60 degrees south latitude. So this becomes important in a minute because for all the ships that go to these places, they're defined how they operate by a code established by the IMO. Why does Woods Hole go to the Arctic? Why do we? We've been supporting science in the Arctic for well over 30 years. So the ships that I operate, we go up into the very top of Baffin Bay above the Davis Straits for a set of science instruments every summer. So you can see by the maps here, the charts, we're working for the Davis Strait Observing System, and that's a group of scientists from all over the United States and internationally. And we go up and we tend our instruments and we take scientific measurements and we put that data into a repository. So what's the Polar Code when we're operating ships? So basically it's an international rule, and it defines, you can read it up here, but it basically is about the design, the construction, the operations, and the training of the people that might go to the Arctic or to the polar waters. So this helps to protect the polar waters by defining the environmental rules that we follow when we go there. So it talks about discharge of oil, talks about discharge of sewage, not bringing back invasive species in your ballast water. It talks about garbage, it talks about chemicals. So basically we have a zero discharge when we go to the polar waters. So your ship has to be constructed to plan for that, and your sailors and people on the ships have to know how to manage that to adhere to these rules. It's also important that when you take your equipment to the Arctic, that it's built for that environment. So that means your ship has safety components. Sometimes those components are built into the ship itself, but it's also about the equipment that you bring with you. So it also has to do with operations and manning and planning for the people that you operate the equipment. So just some dates. The Polar Code came into effect. So ships that were built after January 1st, 2018, or go into other survey. If you're going to go to the polar waters, you've got to be polar compliant. So for the two ships that I have, we're Ice Class C on the Atlantis and Ice Class DO. These are different ratings. I'll kind of refer to these next. But really just to get you to understand that there's a set of rules that we have to follow when your ship goes there. And just to give you an example, there are many different codes of ship operations in polar waters, and that's how the ships were designed. The ships that we have are the very lowest polar code, and that's highlighted in the red boxes. What that really means for us is we are not icebreakers. We go in the summertime to the north when we're in primarily ice-free waters. And when those conditions change or the weather changes, we're going to leave before we get into trouble. So one of the things that the Polar Code does, and it says if you're going to go to work in these polar waters, you're going to write an operations manual, and that's going to define how you're going to operate there. And someone's going to inspect that manual and make sure it's compliant and it faces all the rules. So this is sort of what ours looks like. You can sort of see table of contents, but then there's different chapters about what we're doing, risk management, ship operations, and I'm going to go into these a little bit in a minute. One of the most important things that we did before we go is we look at risk assessments. And we look at the categories on the left-hand side of your screen. These are the things that we sit down as a group and we sort of challenge ourselves with things about ice, ingesting ice into our engine room, outfitting the ship to make sure we don't ship ice or we have ice accretion on the ship, how we're going to work in the darkness or extra light. All of those risk assessments are separate exercises we do that are on the left-hand side. The one on the right-hand side gives you an example of just one, which is basically leaving the ship in a life raft. What do we do about polar bears? And you might chuckle about, oh, why are these guys on ships worried about polar bears? You'll see in another slide because they're there. And you want to make sure that you protect your people, and that includes all the gear you're going to bring with you. One important thing to consider is most maritime insurance doesn't cover you to go to the Arctic. So you have to negotiate early with your insurance carrier to make sure you have coverage. For us in our insurance policy, our trading zone is limited to 52 degrees north latitude. So I can take our ships pretty much anywhere in the world and I have insurance coverage, but as soon as I deviate from that, I have to have approval or I don't have any insurance. And there's multiples of different insurance, as you probably learned here at Maine Maritime. Hull insurance, pollution insurance, insurance for your personnel that work on the ships. So here, my policy says I can go with the Neil Armstrong above 52 degrees north latitude for a few weeks in the summertime, but it's written into my insurance policy. So just some slides. Why is it different going there? You know, ice navigation is one of our hazards. This was a shot from last summer. As we talked about in our Lunch and Learn, ice navigation and restricted visibility. So the shot on the right hand is the ice radar on the Neil Armstrong. You see the targets that are there. A lot of times we're in fog, a lot of times we're in darkness, a lot of times we're in snow. So trying to drive your vessel and operate your vessel and be safe while you're navigating around all these different, what could be hazards. And then what happens when the weather changes or you stay too long? You have ice accretion on your ship. Ships aren't built to have stability for lots of ice, so you've got to get rid of it. You've got to free up your doors. You've got to free up your safety equipment. So these are just shots. These are historical shots from our ship, the Nor. The biggest thing I wanted to bring to everyone's attention today are the things that we worry about when we go to the Arctic. And so here are just some of our concerns. When you go to the Arctic, you got to worry about your communications equipment because your cell phone isn't going to work. Even sometimes your satellite systems don't work. They have to be rated for the low altitude polar satellites, and so you might have redundant systems. SAR stands for Search and Rescue. It could be more than 7 days before anyone comes to help you. So think about being stuck somewhere, having a fire, having a medical emergency, having a problem on your ship, and it's going to be a week or more before someone comes and helps you. You have to plan for that. So you got to bring critical spare parts. You got to train your medical staff. You've got to have all the medicines you want. You got to make sure the people coming with you are physically fit and they don't have any pre-existing medical conditions. And if they do, you got to kind of work around it. Lack of medical facilities close by, limited resources for emergency towing or firefighting. You're kind of on your own. As we learned last year, we lost an engine, limited repair facilities. We had to limp all the way home. And that's a decision we made with the Coast Guard and our class society. We made that decision to come home, and we had redundancy in our ship. Limited places of refuge when the weather turns bad. You got limited places to transfer your crew, so pretty much whoever's going with you, they're going to stay with you. They're not getting off because they get seasick or they want to go to someone's wedding or their friend's dog ran away. You're stuck for the summer because there's no way to get off. Weather changes quickly. You got to keep up with it. Darkness happens. It happens really at the end of the season where it really changes what you're doing. We want to look out for endangered marine mammal species because some of these species haven't seen our type of ships. We don't want to hit them or cause them any harm with our instruments that we use. We want to make sure navigational hazards, you can't always make sure your charts are accurate. There's not a lot of people up there doing this bathymetric soundings up there and things are changing. There aren't a lot of navigational aids, language barriers with some of the passing ships or the native peoples that you may come in contact with. We ask for permits and clearances before we go to make sure we don't get in trouble. And then you've got to have a real strong sense of cultural awareness. You're going into someone else's operating area. You've got to make sure that they know you're coming, what you're going to do, and that if you learn anything there, you've got to share that with them afterwards. So one thing we do is we seek outside support. So I'm very fortunate. I ran into Dan. Dan runs the Harsh Environment Technology Center at ABS in St. John's, Newfoundland. So when I need to know who to contact for search and rescue, or if I want to know who's got the best ice forecasts, Dan is a great resource for me. And he really wants us to be successful, so he helps us and gives us the best tools possible. All the people that go on our ships to the Arctic, we send them to get more training. We send them to get training here because you guys are doing a great job here. So last year, I think 14 of our people came to training here, and they went through ice simulation, and they have their licenses endorsed. You can't really see it very well on the blue side, but Diego's got his polar endorsement on his license for his STCW. And then you talk to your friends. So Eric King is a couple years behind me. He takes care of the Falkor. He's the manager of the Falkor. He rebuilt that ship. They're down in Antarctica right now, and they're going through the same sort of things that we are about training and ships and equipment and logistics and support. So we talk to each other. We try and help each other out. So we'll get to questions a little bit later. But if you're interested about jobs in oceanography or you want to work on oceanographic ships, there's a website for the UNOLS group, and they've got all the jobs on all the oceanographic ships, and there's technician jobs, there's support jobs, there's jobs that support the equipment, as well as mariner jobs. So it's a great resource. You don't always find it because it's not well advertised because we're nonprofits. But if you're interested in going to sea, that's a good place to see. My name and contact information is up there. And operating a submarine at sea far away from home is even worse than going to the Arctic. So there's the Alvin, which is one of our human-operated submarines, and that's our ship Atlantis. They've been spending time down off of Costa Rica looking at volcanic vents. And so that's other interesting part of where the ships might go. You can't go to the Arctic all year round. So appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'll be on the panel later, and we'll have questions later. So thanks for your time.
Mr. Gallagher, for that outstanding presentation. For our next presentation, I would like to introduce Dr. Chelsea Wegner-Koch, Assistant Professor of Environmental Science at American University in Washington, D.C. Dr. Koch specializes in Arctic marine ecology and biogeochemistry. Her research uses lipid biomarkers and stable isotopes to understand ecosystem change, particularly related to declining sea ice. Her research emphasizes the co-production of knowledge, working closely with indigenous communities to bridge diverse perspectives in Arctic science and to promote ethical research practices. She has served in various science administration roles with the National Science Foundation, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, contributing to global efforts in ocean sustainability and equity in research. Dr. Koch is currently involved in collaborative projects on contaminants in Arctic seabirds, community-based monitoring of walruses, community subsistence adaptations, and the establishment of repositories for Arctic marine samples. Dr. Koch holds a PhD in Marine, Estuarine, and Environmental Science from the University of Maryland, an MS in Marine Science from the University of South Carolina, and a BS in Environmental Science from the University of Mary Washington. We are thrilled to have Dr. Koch join us to speak on Arctic marine ecology, biogeochemistry, co-production of knowledge. Please give her a warm welcome.
Great, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm going to assume all is okay. All right, well, thank you all for the invitation to be here today. As we said, I'll be talking about the loss of sea ice and its impact on the Arctic marine environment, a transformation that isn't just ecological, but deeply connected to global industry policy and indigenous livelihoods. So I'll briefly walk you through some of the molecular and ecological tools that I use to monitor change and how these insights inform our understanding of Arctic food webs, ecosystem resilience, and the broader implications for maritime industries, which are expanding their footprint in increasingly ice-free waters. I am also here to tell you about where Arctic research is heading. I've been participating in the 4th International Conference on Arctic Research Planning, and I've had a particular focus working with the team that's focused on advancing the co-production of knowledge and indigenous-led research. So as the Arctic becomes more accessible, understanding what's at stake below the surface, ecologically and culturally, is critical for making informed and ethical choices. So just to orient us and have some shared terminology here, as many of you may be aware that at the base of the Arctic marine food web, we have two different types of production. We have sea ice algae and phytoplankton in the open waters. And so these microscopic producers are the fuel for the entire ecosystem. These organisms drive primary production and influence the timing and quality of food available to zooplankton, benthic organisms on the seafloor, and ultimately species like whales and walruses that are critical to indigenous subsistence. As the Arctic warms and sea ice declines, we're seeing major shifts in when, where, and how this production occurs. And that has ripple effects for what other higher trophic level organisms are responding as well. And so to monitor these changes, I have been using a suite of molecular and chemical tools, including lipid biomarkers, um, which help us to distinguish between ice-associated and open water production, stable isotopes for tracking energy transfer and trophic structure across the ecosystem. I've been recently using DNA and DNA metabarcoding, which provides detailed insight into biodiversity and diet composition down to the species level, which is really useful. Contaminant analysis to identify exposure to anthropogenic pollutants through the food web, as well as phytoplankton toxins, which are a result of harmful algal blooms and an emerging risk to wildlife and human health in the Arctic. And so together, these tools allow us to detect ecological tipping points and inform adaptive responses that respect both the scientific insight and community priorities. So one tool in particular that is my passion is called IP25, or the ice proxy with 25 carbons. This is a lipid that is produced by sea ice diatoms, and we're able to track changes at the base of the food web with this. This unique compound is fascinating. It's formed only in Arctic sea ice, so not in the Antarctic. And we still aren't quite sure why it's produced and what role it plays. But we know that it persists as it moves through the ecosystem from the sediments to the zooplankton up to the marine mammals. So by measuring IP25 in environmental and biological samples, we're able to detect shifts from an ice-associated food web, which is one that's been more historical and one that we still see today, to one that's increasingly dominated by pelagic or open water production. So it's an incredibly powerful and uniquely Arctic tool for monitoring ecological change in a rapidly warming region. So this work somewhat recently culminated in a pan-Arctic synthesis with across 123 species and spanned all trophic levels and all seasons and all habitats. So from the benthic or the seafloor to the pelagic or open water and the sympagic or ice-associated components. And so using these sea ice biomarkers that I've just described, we found that sea ice organic carbon is present across the entire food web year round. And so despite the short window of ice algal production, which normally happens in the spring and maybe into the early summer, we see that it serves as a foundational and enduring fuel for Arctic marine ecosystems year round. And so, this had been sort of a point of debate and still is, but is to, how important is sea ice algae? And if the sea ice goes away, particularly the seasonality of it, if that production isn't able to occur, does that matter? And so what we're seeing and what the case that we're making from this is that it does matter, that it is this really rich fuel that it's deposited into the sea, into the sediments, and then we have this kind of food bank reserve for the year, and makes its way up the food chain. And so from this work, I was really, so that was a lot of work that I had done as part of my PhD. But more recently, and as I've spent more and more time in the Arctic, and largely from the icebreakers that we've heard about already on the Healy and some of our Canadian partners on their Coast Guard vessels. But the more that I've learned about the ecosystem and the studying their prey and understanding and appreciating the relationship that the local communities have with the walrus, I was really drawn to this species as something that I wanted to know more about and to kind of engage more deeply on. And so walruses are more than just a sentinel species for environmental change. Because of it, it has this close association with sea ice. But also they're culturally vital, they're ecologically central, and deeply respected by indigenous communities across the region. So choosing to focus my research of now, which is the primary focus, it's coming from a place of deep respect for the land and the fauna and the people, and a recognition of the importance of co-producing knowledge and weaving together indigenous knowledge with these Western science observations. And as a quick primer on the Pacific walrus and why it's so interesting, is that the walrus has a very close relationship with the sea ice. You can see in this map here that on the bottom, the red solid line here is the maximum sea ice extent, which typically is in March. And then up here we have the dotted dotted line, which is the minimum sea ice extent, which is typically in September. And you can't see on this map here, but the bathymetry would show you that this is basically the extent of the continental shelf as well. So in the green and the yellow here, we have the range of the Pacific walrus. And so it basically lines up with where the seasonal sea ice edge is, and in these shallow waters. And the reason for this is that because the sea ice, we have that ice algae that's produced early in the season. It sinks down to the seafloor. It provides this rich, nutritious food source. And as a result, we have a lot of rich clam beds on the seafloor in the northern Bering and Chukchi seas. And so this is what the prey item that walrus prefer. And so they're able to access the clam beds by utilizing the sea ice as a platform. And in the spring, as the sea ice starts to retreat, the females and the juveniles or calves, they migrate north with the sea ice edge up into the Chukchi Sea, where they spend the summer foraging on the rich clam beds up here. And so the question is, with this change in the timing and thickness of sea ice and other changes associated with that, is what that means for the walrus. And so the reason that we are curious is that with the lack of sea ice, we're seeing more and more walrus haul out on land. And so you'll see, for example, here that walrus can haul out by the tens of thousands on the beach. And this can result in stampedes, and we see some mortalities associated with that. And so for a number of ecological reasons, we are interested to know more about what's happening with the Pacific walrus. But also from the aspect of the co-production of knowledge, this is a concept that is grounded in a collaborative approach that brings together indigenous knowledge holders and researchers as equal partners throughout all stages of the research process. And in the Arctic specifically, this means grounding science in respect, reciprocity, and relevance to the priorities of indigenous communities whose lands and waters are being studied. So it's essential for generating knowledge that is ethical, place-based, and actionable in the face of rapid change. And because walrus are a vital cultural and subsistence resource for indigenous communities, co-production was essential for the work that I wanted to be involved with. So working in partnership with elders, hunters, and community members has ensured that the research questions, methods, and outcomes will reflect community priorities and respect local expertise. So this approach strengthens the relevance, accountability, and ethical integrity of Arctic research. And just a quick overview of what that looked like for one of the projects that I'm involved with through the SEARCH program, which is the study of environmental Arctic change. We started out with, this was an NSF-funded project that brought together groups of scientists, indigenous knowledge holders, and policy experts and with no set questions to work with, but allowing us to go through the process to go co-produce those questions together. And so the example that we started was focused on walrus and wondering how will the population respond to climate change. But after lots of conversation and hearing from the communities and having to rethink those questions, we ended up tossing that and realized that what the community was asking for was how accessible will walruses be in the future. And so we had to, once we established what that question was, come together and provide our relative areas of expertise. So we had historical and future projections for sea ice. From the elders and community experts, we were able to have observations before and since the satellite era of 1978. And then with the policy consultants, we were able to get at questions about how to better support hunters to co-produce workable solutions. And this all depended on this process at the beginning of building trust and relationships, which is fundamental in the co-production process. And defining what those workable solutions were is something that's been an ongoing process and one that we're trying to still better understand. But for example, a mechanism for emergency declarations as there are with other disasters and with food security issues, as well as addressing hunter safety issues with thinning sea ice and tools available for accessing the walrus. And so we've been going through this process to better understand this, but an important part of it as well was understanding who our audience was and making sure that we were tailoring the outputs of this process to our to specific audiences and not just producing scientific papers that only are being read by other scientists. So this is just a quick example to show you what that looks like. One example is this Arctic Answers, which is a 2-page policy brief. So this is more directed to policymakers, but looking at how on St. Lawrence Island, where a majority of this walrus hunting occurs, to see from 1850 up to 2100 how that sea ice is changing, and that we're looking at a future where there are nearly year-round open water conditions. And so this has led to a project that I'm now participating in and leading, which is using all these tools together to understand what's happening during the walrus harvest each year with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and the U.S. Geological Survey and COERIC. And so this time next week, I'll be on St. Lawrence Island, and as the hunt commences, we'll be working together to collect a suite of observations to better understand the changing walrus ecology and reproductive success among other observations. So it's exciting work ahead, and I'm glad I had the opportunity to share that with you today. And this is a picture of my search colleagues participating in an on-the-land workshop and trying to come up with these co-produced solutions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Cook, for excellent contribution to this discussion. We'll now be taking a short intermission before continuing with our esteemed guest speakers. During this, we'll be presenting student interviews showing their perspectives on climate change in the Arctic. We will resume at 16:05. If you are exiting the auditorium, please exit through the lower doors. We have another group of students entering from the upper doors. Thank you.
The Symposium has been a long-running project at Maine Maritime Academy that educates students about the way that the industry is changing in response to climate change. I think that the Arctic is particularly important, especially up here in Maine, as changing trends in the Arctic mean that we're likely to see more shipping and more activity in the area, and it's important for us as mariners to be cognizant of that impact. I think it's important for anyone in any industry to be aware of the impacts of their industry and to be mindful of the planet and how we as professionals impact others through our activities. That's why I run the Environmental Action Club, and I think that part of that mission should be the Climate Symposium, as that is one of the biggest impacts we have as professionals and as mariners as a whole. I believe that the ocean is one of the most important factors of the environment and of climate. And when we go and we look around and we see the climate events around in the rest of the nation, they're not tailored towards the maritime environment. I think that it's important for us to understand specifically the impacts on our industry and on the ocean as a whole. I'm hoping that the Climate Symposium can simply just make us more aware as professionals on how we impact those around us. That's the key takeaway I want people to have, is that everything you do as a professional working in industry impacts the people around you. And that's not only climate change, but it's environmental impacts, it's noise, all of these things change the world around you.
We chose the theme of the Arctic for this climate symposium, partly due to the fact that we were going back there on the schooner Bowden, making a return to the Arctic and for the first time in 15 years. This theme is of interest to me, given that I traveled there. I got to see firsthand West Greenland, at least part of the Arctic. One of the things that I'll remember from going to the Arctic was the science that we did, and we were able to do several CTD casts and also collect eDNA samples to bring back here and study. In the future, I do hope to do some work that is related to this. For my senior research project, I looked at iron fertilization, and so that is involved in carbon dioxide removal and is considered a geoengineering technology.
The Arctic has been interesting to me for a long time, just because of what it is, but that interest has also been enhanced by the fact that I sailed there this summer on Bowden, and she's a 103, almost 104-year-old research vessel designed explicitly for Arctic exploration. And this summer, we continued that legacy of taking a record of the animals we saw, the water samples that we're processing for eDNA, so we'll be able to see what species we couldn't visually observe. We also took CTD profiles, including very close to the edge of a glacier, so we might be able to see how the salinity and temperature change as the currents go under the edge of the glacier. For the maritime academies especially, bringing a focus on climate change to the general student population is important because it impacts all of our careers, even the ones that aren't directly involved in research or shipping. Bringing awareness to what causes the climate to change, what we can do about that, and what we can expect is important. I would like to go continue my research career in North Atlantic and Arctic waters. So I'm planning to be on the front lines of seeing the largest shifts, seeing the ice move back year after year. And comparing the photos from older Bowden trips to what we saw, it's already very different. The ironic plus side of climate change is there will be something new to study. The downside of that, though, is destabilizing the ecosystems that are there. So we're looking at the landscape, the seascape, both collapsing, the species that are there moving or disappearing. Change is proceeding too fast for things to adapt currently.
Why the symposium? Why the Arctic? I think this conversation necessitates a little bit of nuance and a little bit of critical thinking here, because we have a lot of double-edged swords going on, where you have economic opportunity through new shipping lanes, maybe new tourism opportunities, things like that. with this evolving Arctic, you're also going to have geopolitical tension. You're going to have erosion of biodiversity. You're going to have erosion of indigenous culture, potentially, as well. You have to consider all of those factors together as an interconnected whole. And I think that is something that the symposium will benefit from as well. We are bringing together speakers from a diverse array of backgrounds, experiences, and academics that will be able to cover all of these broad topics of national security, the environment, indigenous affairs, geopolitical affairs, and really be able to bring all of this together and really hit home that none of this exists in a vacuum. And if you're going to tackle the issue of climate change in the Arctic, you have to consider everything and involve everyone in that discussion. I have always been interested in education or assisting in some form of education, and that's evolved.
Welcome back to our guest speaker series as part of the 2025 Maritime Academy Climate Symposium. Our next speaker will be Mr. Jeremy Altendorf, U.S. Coast Guard retired. Mr. Altendorf joined the University of Alaska Anchorage in October 2024 as the Associate Director for Arctic Programs and Strategic Implementation within the Office of Research. In this role, he oversees critical initiatives aimed at advancing research and strategic engagement in the Arctic, fostering collaborative solutions to regional security and environmental challenges, and supporting sustainable development in Alaska and beyond. Before joining UAA, Mr. Altendorf served as the Ted Stevens Center for Arctic Security Studies as Chief of the Director's Action Team, where he led cross-functional teams in support of Arctic security policy and strategic initiatives. His experience includes a 6-year tenure with United States Coast Guard Sector Anchorage as Program Manager for Arctic Operations, where he managed a $1.2 million annual budget, ensuring regulatory missions were effectively carried out across Alaska's rural areas. He is widely recognized for his expertise in marine environmental protection, specializing in oil and chemical spill planning, preparedness, and response. Earlier in his career, Mr. Altendorf coordinated United States Coast Guard maritime security efforts for major national events, including the 2017 presidential inauguration and the 2016 Democratic National Convention. His federal service also includes roles as training officer for the Coast Guard's National Strike Force and hazardous substance response specialist, managing response to oil and chemical spills in diverse aquatic environments across the United States. Mr. Altendorf holds a BS in Chemistry and Environmental Science from Creighton University, an MS in Engineering with a focus on Environmental Engineering from the University of Missouri, and an MBA from George Washington University. He is a certified hazardous material manager and project management professional. His career spans over 28 years with various federal agencies, including the United States Coast Guard, EPA, and Department of the Interior, where he has contributed to significant environmental projects, policy development, and regulatory enforcement efforts. We are pleased to have Mr. Altendorf with us today to speak on regulatory requirements, incident preparedness, and disaster response operations in the United States Arctic. Without further ado, please welcome Mr. Jeremy Altendorf.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Want to thank you for having me here today. So I'm going to talk about a lot of things, but basically my focus is on operations in the Arctic, and I'll end the talk on some research points so that I think are especially relevant given my new role and my post-Coast Guard career. So let me make sure the slide is working. There we go. So roughly, we're going to talk about what the Arctic looks like today from the lens of operations, especially focused on the U.S. Coast Guard, lessons in environmental protection over the years and in my time here in Alaska, and then lastly, looking ahead, the role of future practitioners, and trying to speak to the audience today a little bit about what I think the future holds. All right, so the Arctic today is a region in transition. So what we're looking at here is a graph of Arctic amplification. And basically, this is just giving data to what everybody knows to be true already, which is all the various studies have looked at how global warming and climate change is impacting the climate, and whatever's happening in the lower 48 is happening up to 3 to 4 times as fast here in the Arctic. So a lot of studies confirm that that Arctic amplification is really having a significant impact here. Let's talk about sea ice, extent of sea ice. Again, things that I think folks are probably in the room are well aware of. But when we look at Arctic amplification, we see the impact of that, right? So the study area is the black lines, and the extent of sea ice in March and September are in white. And that in white is from 1981 to 2010. And then all the colored lines are from 2011 and on. And what you can see is a significant reduction in the extent of sea ice in the spring season versus the fall season, and that is making Arctic waters especially navigable for longer times. The shoulder seasons are farther apart, and extent of sea ice is ultimately less than we're historically used to. Let's talk about the return of the blob. One of the things driving issues in Arctic is a large mass of water with relatively high heat content floating at the surface and underneath, as well as underneath in the North Pacific Ocean. And what that's doing is causing significant changes in the fisheries, which is a real important economic driver, as well as sustaining traditionally used lifestyles of Alaska Natives. So the details of the chart on the right aren't as important as to know that the species on the left are having a negative impact due to the heat blob, and other species are surviving in the heat blob or moving more north, and it's causing a massive change in fisheries. It's closed some fisheries, and we are reacting in this space in the maritime environment here in the Arctic. Another thing to keep in mind is there are 229 federally recognized tribes in Alaska, and all of them are someone you have to communicate with, you have to engage with, regardless of what you're doing in the federal space, whether it's regulatory work or vessel inspections or commercial fishing vessel exams or oil spill response. All of these communities, whether it's tribal governments or municipalities that have a strong relationship with tribal governments, this is something that's unique to Alaska for certainly, and something I can't overstate how important it is and how complex communications can be when you're dealing with high consequence, low probability events like an oil spill or a typhoon. So basically, to summarize, life in the Arctic is incredibly complex, and Alaska Native populations that make up most of rural Alaska are connected to the land and resources in ways that most of us won't fully understand. The only way you can live really affordably in rural Alaska is if there's a year-round food source that doesn't have to be shipped in. And with that comes maintaining that traditional use lifestyle and following that transition from a historically nomadic culture to setting up communities, building schools, and then at the end of the day, all of that's possible because you ship bulk fuel and that establishes itself as its own infrastructure, but also fuels heat and energy for the community. So let's talk about environmental protection in the Arctic. The previous speakers were great, and I really appreciate all of that data. Every time I hear a talk on the Arctic, I learn something new, so I really appreciate that. One of the things that I think the speakers were clear on is the unique relationships and also the challenges that occur in the Arctic space. So Establishing and maintaining consistent long-term partnerships with indigenous governments and in corporations is especially important. And the federal government and its agencies aren't really set up in a way that allows for innovation in this space. It's really cookie cutter policy implementation. What works in DC will work in LA, will work in Texas, will work in Seattle. That is not true when it comes to policy implementation of regulations or regulatory work or inspections in Alaska, especially off the road system in rural Alaska. Maintaining that cultural context for indigenous knowledge, incorporating all of that indigenous knowledge in what we do. Again, there's not a lot of precedence for that, and agencies struggle, do the best that they can, but we are challenged in that space. This is an incredibly maritime focused area that has a lot of jurisdictional complexity. So when you're talking about doing regulatory work, it's important to keep that in mind. And then lastly, I think the previous speakers made this pretty clear. There's limited infrastructure with incredibly harsh logistics, which makes it hard for any commercial person or vessel or company to operate in the Arctic. And but that applies to living in the Arctic as well. Let's talk about. Could you say that again? Let's talk about some of the things that have challenged the U.S. Coast Guard in the Arctic space. And one of those is a good example of that is the Laura Maersk, which had a casualty in the Unimak Pass. It was a fully laden container ship, 51,500 gallons of fuel. They had, Coast Guard forced a mobilization of 2 tugs to respond to that. And use the emergency towing system to safely tow it to a mooring ball in Dutch Harbor. The red star is where the casualty occurred, and the blue dot is on Alaska or Dutch Harbor. And I can't understate the problems when there's a number, thousands of vessels that transit the Great Circle route every year. They all go through Unimak Pass, and these kinds of incidents are all too common. Ecotourism, cruise ship vessels, large and small, are in the state, and with, sometimes in some places centuries old charting that has not been updated for, better part of 50 or 100 years. There's challenges in navigating these waters, and ecotourism is only expanding as these shoulder seasons grow. We're talking about things that are complex in Alaska. I think I would bore everyone in the room with a long lecture on alternative planning criteria. As an oil spill nerd, I've dedicated my life as a federal employee to responding to oil spills and chemical spills, and I could go on and on. I could spend all day talking about the regulatory scheme that sets up, environmental protection in Alaska. But in almost every way, it fails because the system was set up for lower 48 type logistics and infrastructure. Alternative planning criteria is acknowledgement by the U.S. Coast Guard that says, hey, our traditional vessel response plans and requirements for preparedness and prevention fail in Alaska because of these issues and challenges. So we've allowed industry and vessel corporations to manage their own prevention and preparedness rules based on a set of requirements. And for 20 years, the Coast Guard's tried to get on top of that. And the industry's challenged to meet what would be required anywhere else in the country. So it's enough to know that the regulatory scheme, the traditional regulatory scheme, doesn't often totally work in Alaska in the Arctic space. And then lastly, I'll talk about the facilities problem. So the upper left-hand picture here is a traditional bulk fuel facility you'd find in almost every lower 48, everywhere in the country. And the lower left image is an extreme example, but not terribly divergent, certainly outside the bell curve, but only by a little bit, of a fuel facility in rural Alaska. Harsh conditions really make it difficult to manage bulk fuel facilities, and the infrastructure required to keep them operating is really difficult because they're community managed and not necessarily by trained professionals at all times. Couple things I want to talk about this slide. I created this in 2018 as a way to reflect the facilities that we are supposed to regulate as in the U.S. Coast Guard versus the number of those that are on. So from left to right, orange represents the number of facilities in the state. The gray bar represents those that store bulk fuel. The next one to the right is red, and it represents the number of facilities on a road system. And then the last bar is the number of billeted facility inspectors. And that was for for Sector Anchorage, which is now called Sector Western Alaska and U.S. Arctic. And basically, this image just represents the challenge the Coast Guard had when you visualize the number of facilities versus the ones you can access on the road system versus the number of billets or inspectors you have to inspect them. So two things on this. This slide made the rounds of Coast Guard headquarters. It turned my $300,000 budget in 2018 to a $1.4 million budget in 2022. The power of visualization as a way to change policy or policy implementation, I cannot overstate, and highly recommend you get good at seeing a problem and finding innovative solutions. And one of them is telling a story, and the visualization of that story is important. Okay, so traditional solutions in Alaska and the Arctic are not going to happen for a bunch of reasons. And preventing those kinds of solutions are, again, lack of dedicated and professional operators and response managers in communities themselves. It's no fault of their own, but when there's 200 communities that all have a population of 2,000 or less, there's only so much professional capability, and when there's no road system there, it's just doubly challenging. That means the delivery of training is difficult. It means there's high turnover for personnel. It means that there's not a lot of infrastructure or professional spill response organizations that are close by. So, and without a regional government, and oftentimes communities first look at a regulator is from the state or from the federal government. Usually in other parts of the country, there's a couple other regional governments or regional systems to provide some layer of assistance, and that just doesn't exist in the state. All right, looking ahead. So, key attributes for an Arctic maritime practitioner. I think you can sum them up in 3 categories. There's cross-training, soft skills, and situational awareness. I could, again, spend all day talking about these things, but I really want to talk to cross-training. I want to talk about operator implementation. When I talk soft skills, I want to focus on social science of community engagement and how important that is. And then lastly, situational awareness, which amounts to Arctic research and how you can focus your professional world in the future on that. So I'll quickly talk about some of the statewide solutions and innovations we had. I created the Alaska Bulk Fuel Work Group, where we got a bunch of state, federal, and quasi-governmental organizations to come together to talk about the problem. Denali Commissions funded a bulk fuel aggregation study. All of these things, using UAS to monitor fuel tanks post-disaster, all of these things are important innovations that don't have a corollary in the lower 48. And I highly, again, underlining that point where innovation's key in making things happen in the Arctic, especially U.S. Arctic. Typhoon Merbok response. When I talk about community engagement, is making it clear that the first time people see you as a federal regulator or responder shouldn't be after a storm hits, and that having that soft skill is so important. Being able to do community engagement, being able to identify what exactly public welfare is, how you manage that, how you manage your touch points, and having the money and resources to do that is so key. We are really good in some places, but FEMA, if you were to ask folks in rural Alaska how FEMA did post-Typhoon Merbok, you would not get a positive response. The federal government struggles to execute its mission and implement policy in the U.S. Arctic. So lastly, let's talking about situational awareness and how important it is for practitioners to really develop a good research question and how you frame that. And I wanted to spend a couple minutes before I get before I finish on talking about how you create a research question. And it's important that when you're looking from the when you're looking at the world around you and you're underway in whatever vessel or whatever career you have in front of you, seeing being observant, writing stuff down, seeing patterns, creating a question out of those patterns, and then collaborating on with somebody or an organization to answer that research question, I think is super important and a really good ending message. So if you see something, ask something is a good way I frame how to build a research question. So if you look on this table, I'm not going to go into detail, but you've got operational challenges on the example operational challenges. Like you see stuff, you see a pattern. How do you write that pattern down in some kind of form of challenge and then turn that challenge into a research question and staying engaged in the community of research especially when it comes to in the Arctic space is super important. I've listed not all of the Arctic research vessels in the world, but these are the big ones, I think. And the one that UAF, University of Alaska Fairbanks, manages is pictured here. I just can't say it enough that the continuing Arctic research and being engaged in that community, even if it's just, hey, an hour every day or a couple hours a week, I'm gonna get online and do some research and find out what's happening out there in this space, I think is super important to stay engaged if you want to be a solid Arctic professional, maritime professional. So research is ongoing and responsive. It's happening all the time. Research responds to real world problems like needing better charts or better spill response strategies or better weather prediction in the Arctic. So all of that stuff is being talked about or asked. Those questions are being asked all the time. So it's super important that this community, the community you're about to walk into, that you are staying engaged on those things. And so there's all kinds of requests for information coming out. There's all kinds of opportunities to engage with the research community or be a part of the research community. And mariners have a lot of insights in this. Can't underline that point enough. And really, I want to talk about when I say like getting out there and looking at the research opportunities, it's more than a Google search, because what comes at you is algorithmic information, but real professional curiosity and engagement is more challenging, takes more energy, and is by far going to help you in your career a lot more than just flipping through social media. So why does this matter? I think, all of the science that you've heard has all been generated from researchers in the field. And all of those things, those observations and questions inform all the policy that comes out. And so having the ability to shape that is really important. So I'm going to wrap up. Just the view from the bridge could spark the next insight and guide the next breakthrough. I appreciate everybody's time, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Allendorf, for sharing your valuable perspective. I am pleased to introduce our next speaker, Professor Tirza Tippenpoh of Arctic Inupiaq Heritage. Professor Poe is an instructor and teaching fellow at Harvard University in the Sustainability and Environmental Management Program and mentor at Harvard Kennedy School's Arctic Initiative. She has guest lectured at MIT, Bodo University College, Tufts, Boston College, Boston University, Harvard Law School, U of San Diego, University College London, and other institutions on social and environmental justice, indigenous rights, marine policy, and collaborative development. She founded TRIO Global ICS Consultancy to work with institutions, governments, and organizations to mitigate risk, resolve conflicts, and advise on strategies for collaborative development with communities. She advises, writes, and speaks about sustainability issues across the globe, addressing Arctic and marine policy, vulnerable community, indigenous relations, international environmental governance, resource development, climate change, and business resilience. In her previous leadership positions with Royal Dutch Shell and TransCanada, she designed and led community engagement programs, negotiated agreements, and worked with international organizations including World Bank, Inuit Circumpolar Council, World Wildlife Fund, First Peoples Worldwide, Living Earth, and the Nature Conservancy to advance sustainable resource development with an emphasis on offshore assets. Professor Poe, a former senior fellow at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center, currently serves on the advisory board of the London-based Polar Research and Policy Initiative, on the board of directors at Henry Clay Center, and has advisory board position with the University of New England. In addition, she is a fellow at the Northeast Climate Adaptation Center, working to develop effective communications of climate science and strategies with various publics. Professor Poe holds a master's in sustainability and environmental management from Harvard, a bachelor's in journalism, and postgraduate studies in public policy. She is also a doctoral research fellowship fellow at UMaine Orono. Professor Poe is joining us today to discuss the impact of climate change in the Arctic on indigenous communities. Folks, please welcome Professor Tirza Tippenpoe.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? I just want to make sure. I'm going to assume that's a yes. So thanks for that great introduction. And I just want to take half a second to say thank you to the previous speakers. You set me up. How did you know? So each of our prior speakers have touched on something that you're going to hear me speak about in the next few minutes, from policy to practical considerations that Paul covered, to co-production of knowledge that was referred to by Dr. Koch, very important. Collaboration with communities from Jeremy. All of those things will be contained in this, what hopefully will be a 10-minute presentation, if I can manage to pull it off. Before I start, I do want to thank the organizers of this forum. I actually have never seen something so well executed. So kudos to the student organizers. You've really done a remarkable job bringing us all together and doing so seamlessly. So thank you. So as mentioned, my name is Tirza. I am not a professor, but thank you for elevating me to that position. I hope to soon be a professor. I would say you can refer to me as a teacher, instructor at Harvard. I'm very careful about that, you know, Harvard and all. But I am, more importantly, I think, for this talk today, an Inupiaq woman who is from Utqiagvik, which is my home village. That is a village formerly known as Barrow. And I have deep roots in Inuit Nunaat, which is what we're calling the Arctic here today. I've had the privilege of working in this space for many years. Sorry, I just need to find my slides. But before I talk more about that, here's a photo of the village where my family and I come from. And it is a photo of Utqiagvik. It's my aunties in the foreground. It's in the early summer. You can see the Arctic Ocean in the background. You can see the open lead ice, which is very important to us. It signals to us many different things. We are the people of the whale. The woman in the middle, actually, she's not quite a woman yet, is my mother, Lillian Molly Hobson, and my aunties. And I always show this in order to ground myself in where I come from and the knowledge that my ancestors honestly have passed along to me. I am not an individual in this discussion. I'm speaking essentially as part of a collective, as a part of a community. So it's a bit of a different worldview. And there's a quote here that has driven all of my research and frankly my work in industry around the globe from the first UPIC PhD ever, Oscar Quadley, UPIC, basically telling us that Indigenous people can help you, sort of switching the paradigm. And that is essentially what my remarks are based on, that we are here as leaders in the Arctic, and inclusion is simply not enough. You can probably tell that from the title. So I've advised industry and global organizations. I've worked the Alaska Federation Natives. I've worked oil spill response, both on the industry side and for government at the Department of Environmental Conservation. I'm currently doing research around collaborative development, primarily in the U.S. Arctic, but we'll also be looking more carefully at Greenland. So when I speak about Arctic maritime and marine governance, I'm not speaking from the outside. I'm speaking as someone whose people have lived in relationship with these waters for thousands of years. For us, the Arctic is not an empty frontier to be discovered. It is home. It is a space of memory, culture, food, law, and most importantly, responsibility. Now, today I want to share how Inuit governance of the Arctic Ocean is not something new. It's something that has existed for millennia. Indigenous people offer the world lessons in long-term stewardship and consensus-based decision-making, and also relational law. And these are not just governance models. They are lifeways rooted in responsibility, balance, and kinship with the environment. And as we have heard today already, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, that's why I sort of went past that slide a little bit. The Arctic is changing, and it is warming, as we know, 4 times faster than the global average. Sea ice is thinning, storms are more frequent, traditional ice routes are becoming more dangerous to navigate. At the same time, this changing ice is opening up new shipping lanes. The Northwest Passage and the Northern Sea Route, as we heard from earlier. And with that comes increased vessel traffic, cruise ships, industrial shipping, and interest in deep sea mining and oil exploration. These developments bring risk. Noise pollution that disrupts bowhead whales, walrus, and other marine animals. Oil spill potential and fragile ecosystems that would devastate our hunting grounds. Oil spill, lack of Inuit leadership in vessel traffic regulation and emergency response, again, already mentioned, and environmental impact assessments, the lack of Inuit leadership in the EIAs. These are not just technical problems. They're threats to Inuit harvesting rights, our food security, and cultural survival. In the case of my people, 50% of our food supply in 2025 on the North Slope of Alaska is still derived from the ocean, primarily in the form of bowhead whale and walrus, secondarily. So what's at stake in dollars and cents, as the Western world would look at it? Well, the Guggenheim Partners has estimated over $1 trillion in potential investment in the Arctic. And as mentioned by the previous speakers already, that shipping with the opening of the Northwest Passage and the Northern Sea Route, energy, which is primarily oil production, ocean resources, which is fisheries, and then Arctic research, which is a very large bucket. And this investment cannot come at the cost of our survival as a people. Development in the Arctic must align with Indigenous governance, not override it. I'm going to pause for a second, get my slides aligned. This has been a topic of discussion around the world. I'm sitting here next to the head of Guggenheim Partners who had done that study in London. So what happens, as you've probably heard before, what happens in the Arctic does not stay in the Arctic, both from a climate change standpoint and actually from an investment standpoint. But what I frequently find when I go to these forums is the idea that somehow policy development is new in the Arctic. Actually, Inuit governance of the Arctic Ocean is not new. It existed long before any modern map, treaty, or law. Our systems are grounded in an Inuit worldview, value system, and body of knowledge that guides how we relate to ice, animals, water, and each other. Across Inuit Nunat, from Alaska to Nunavut to Greenland to Chukotka, we have governed our homelands through relational law, stewardship, and collective decision-making. Today, these principles are being recognized in marine spatial planning, co-management regimes, and international policy advocacy. Like the Arctic Council. A landmark example of Inuit marine governance is the Inuit Nunat Marine Policy of 2022 by the Inuit Circumpolar Council, or the ICC for short. Founded in 1977 by my great uncle, Eben Hobson Sr., the ICC is a transnational organization that represents over 180,000 Inuit across Canada, Alaska, Greenland, and Chukotka. It was created to unify Inuit voices across colonial imposed borders or nation states, and to advocate for Indigenous rights, culture, and environmental stewardship at regional and international levels. This was a marine policy created by Inuit for Inuit across all 4 regions. The policy outlines a bold and necessary vision, more so now than ever. One, that the Inuit must be rights holders and decision makers, not just stakeholders. That our legal systems and knowledge must shape Arctic marine policy, and that we must have full participation in impact assessment, marine spatial planning, and stewardship. The policy presents something we call the Arctic We Want, a framework for a future where Inuit leadership, cultural continuity, and environmental integrity are at the center. It demands an approach based not on extraction, but on responsibility. In 2023, the ICC Alaska released a powerful declaration titled Inuit Assertion of Sovereignty and Marine Stewardship. It reaffirms Inuit leadership in all aspects of U.S. Arctic marine governance, and it sets a path forward. It calls for Inuit-led shipping corridors informed by local knowledge, co-designed marine regulations that center Indigenous law, and full recognition of Inuit rights in federal marine and environmental frameworks. One of the core principles in this declaration is nothing about us without us. This principle asserts that Inuit must not only be consulted, we must lead. We must help build the tables at which the decisions are made and co-create the legal and environmental regimes that shape the future of the Arctic Ocean. This growing movement is not just about presence, it's about self-determination on the world stage. In Alaska, we're going back to Alaska. Sorry, we've talked a lot about Alaska. I actually spent a lot of time in Maine too, but Alaska gives us such great examples often when we talk about the Arctic. We see Inuit-led governance through the Alaska Eskimo Whaling Commission, or AEWC for short, and the Eskimo Walrus Commission. AEWC was also founded in 1977 in response to threats from international regulators to ban bowhead whaling. Alaska Inuit communities organized and negotiated a co-management agreement with the U.S. government. an agreement that continues today. And under this Inuit-led leadership, the bowhead whale population has grown from around 3,000 in the late 70s to over 16,000 more than human beings today. So that population has quadrupled under Inuit-led management. This isn't just conservation, it's cultural law in practice. The Eskimo Walrus Commission, founded in 1978, also plays a crucial role, protecting hunting rights, monitoring health of walrus populations, and influencing state and federal marine policy. These bodies are real governance institutions, not symbolic roles, grounded in Inuit knowledge and sovereignty. I'm actually, because of time, going to skip talking about Canada and Greenland. I am happy to answer questions about examples of self-governance and Arctic governance in those areas in the question answer period. But I will wrap up by saying, so as you can see, Inuit governance is not new. It is not emerging, it is enduring. Across the circumpolar Arctic, Inuit are asserting leadership, managing conservation areas, defining harvesting rights, and shaping international policy. We are not passive observers of climate change. We are not simply adapting. We are governing with knowledge, with ceremony, with law, because our Arctic Ocean is not empty. It is full. It's full of memory, culture, responsibility, and life. And remember, nothing about us without us. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Poe, for your valued contribution. To all of our speakers, we would like to express our gratitude for joining us today and offering your wealth of perspectives and insights. Students, faculty, and friends of the Academy, please give our guest speakers a round of applause. This concludes our individual speaker presentations for the time being. We will now be taking a brief 5-minute intermission, and during this time, we'll be presenting a video showcasing the summer 2024 voyage of the Arctic schooner Bowden. When we return, we will be hosting our panel discussion before hearing from U.S. Senator Angus King. Thank you.
But it'll spin, it'll push out of the way once you make contact. Slow ahead.
Part of continuing the legacy of going to the Arctic with the Bowden and education in these regions is we have the boat that can do it. She was designed to go into this climate. Having Bowden really speaks to our range of ability and uniqueness that we can provide to our students.
One thing that I quickly learned, just wear more and then take it off later if you need it. But also what I found really cool was every time I came on deck, there was something different. Whether it was there was an iceberg in the distance, or when we actually got close to land, being able to see how the landscape would change.
I definitely killed 2 birds with 1 stone by not only getting a lot of time with sailing and learning how to tie knots, how to stay at the helm, how to chart and plot through a course, how to maintain a log, and how to keep your eye on the weather. But I also got perfect opportunities to collect data off Greenland and prime opportunities to work in a scientific field in such a way as I might do in a real oceanographic career.
Don't do anything, it's gonna spin out of the way. You want me to come ahead? I'll stop. I'll stop.
2-6! We're sailing for the first time, which seems like ages. Engines off. Full sail plan set. Beautiful snow-covered cliffs in front of us. ready about?
Keep pushing, it'll spin straight out of the way.
So we're in the ice, so we're gonna send somebody up to the ice bucket. So just as McMillan did, we'll have someone aloft sitting in the ice bucket up there.
Getting into Disco Bay and seeing just a pure wall of ice.
Man, it was mind-blowing. It was mind-blowing. Just the amount of ice that there was, navigation, that was something that we just kind of rolled into. I mean, you know, we just get up for a watch one day and there's ice out there.
I became like an actual part. I wasn't just a bystander on the vessel. I was actually a cog that had a part to play. And it felt nice to be important, to be needed, and it felt like I was learning. I wasn't just working to do work, I was gaining experience.
Being resilient is like one of the hardest things you can do, but it's also one of the biggest lessons I learned, and it'll probably be one of the biggest takeaways that I'll have from this.
I don't think there's any better platform for hands-on maritime training than a tall ship. You get to do all the different parts of running a ship, but also maneuvering with sails and having to work out a voyage plan based on wind rather than just currents in your fuel supply. It just enhances all those skills that they learn in school. If you want to have a tall ship experience that actually goes somewhere cool, it's one of the very few options.
It was awesome. I came to this school thinking that I wouldn't go on cruise with the Reg kids, but here I was like going to the Arctic as a freshman, and I couldn't think of any other school that I could go to that could provide such an experience.
It was a trial by fire for like a lot of us. A lot of us were really green, and you know, it made sailors out of us. You know, we made it.
Alrighty. Students, faculty, and friends of the Academy, good evening, and welcome back to the 2025 Maritime Academy Climate, talking about climate change in the Arctic. We've now heard from each of our esteemed guest speakers as they offered their own lens on climate change in the Arctic. Now, we will be hosting a question and answer panel discussion with our speakers to encourage dialogue on this topic. Panelists will have the opportunity to answer questions fielded in advance from Maine Maritime Academy students, as well as questions from all of you in the audience here, both in person and virtual. For our in-person attendees, if you have a question that you'd like to ask, and we indicate the time for those questions, then please just raise your hand and you will be provided with a microphone. For our virtual attendees, if you have a question you'd like to ask, then please ask it in the chat and we will relay it to our guest speakers. Now, without further ado, let's get started. First question for the night. For students and future maritime professionals, what skills and knowledge will be most valuable in navigating the challenges and opportunities presented by a changing Arctic?
Well, based on the observations of all of us, I think domain awareness is key and essential. I would also add an appreciation for the fact that this is a multi-domain environment, multidisciplinary environment. Maritime knowledge is essential, but there are a lot of people, as the last speaker pointed out, living on land. So there's a terrestrial element. There's many other aspects to this as well. I think there's a knowledge gap. There's room for people from all disciplines, and the clock is ticking.
Anything to add, Mr. Gallagher?
Sure, I think all of you being here today helps to participate in gathering knowledge. I think everyone who's spoken today has had some points that threaded through all of our presentations. Learning, communicating, collaborating, helping each other out is where we're going to be successful when we push our boundaries to remote waters.
Excellent. Now to our virtual speakers. Mr. Altendorf, anything you'd like to add? My apologies. Go ahead, ma'am.
Well, no, I was just going to say I think innovation in this space is especially key, like the traditional solutions, understanding how systems work around you. So if you're in government, I can give you a long litany of things that are challenging. And then on the flip side is learning how to be a good communicator and what engagement means, because it is not what you think it means. And I think those two things will really serve you all well.
Alrighty. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think that's a great question. In one of my former careers, I've had 3 or 4, I managed the Marine pilots in Southwest Alaska, so out of Dutch Harbor. And during that time, it was during and after that, I was also part of the leadership team developing a $10 billion Arctic Ocean exploration project for Royal Dutch Shell. And we had literal armadas of ships, 16 in our first attempt to do an exploratory well in the Arctic Ocean in 2007. That did not go so well. And I would say to people interested in working in the Arctic, the reason it did not go so well is because they didn't talk to anybody living there. They did not talk. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons ultimately that Shell pulls out is I showed a picture of a drill ship, a circular drill ship you may or may not have noticed in my presentation. That's running aground in 2012. And Indigenous Village was the first responders to that. As it was for the Exxon Valdez, it was the communities of Prince William Sound that responded, not Exxon. So my point here is that if you're going to live and work, whether it's on a boat or doing oceanography, research in industry in the Arctic, you better be talking to the people who live there first, not last. That I can't emphasize that enough. It's not optional. No amount of data will ever be enough until you actually, that's the mistake that Shell made over and over again. And it did literally cost them over $10 billion because they ultimately pull out because they didn't talk to the people or listen to the people of particularly my region, the North Slope Borough, about the challenges of doing exploration in the Arctic. So you start first, and it's not traditional knowledge. We've been doing science for thousands of years. It's the same science. There's not a Western science, there's not a traditional science. Our science is grounded in actually thousands of years of observation. So that's my biggest tip to anybody operating anywhere in the Arctic Ocean is talk to the people who live there and will be most deeply impacted by whatever it is you're planning to do.
I would just follow on that, and thank you, Teresa, for that excellent suggestion that, basically what I was going to say was that essentially the status quo is not the way forward anymore, and that the Arctic is really at the front lines of not just climate change, but also this, it's not necessarily like you've said, it's not a new way of knowing and being and doing in from the Indigenous perspective, but as far as those of us coming in as outsiders and thinking that we have all the right answers or the right questions. And the truth of the matter is that we don't. And we need to think more about back to a former hat I used to wear and working with the UN was this idea of capacity building is not the right way to be thinking about this, but rather capacity sharing. And that applies to any of the industries or fields of science or whatever it is that you're interested in doing in the Arctic. I think that there should always be something that you are open to learning and listening and not coming in as, the any sort of like savior for this climate change issue that we have at hand.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. We're now going to open the floor to you, the audience, for your burning question. So if you have a question you'd like to ask, once again, just raise your hand, and we would be happy to provide you with a microphone. Right there.
Hi. Hello. My name is Roger Marks. I'm from Castine, a resident here. The question is, the waters surrounding the areas you're talking about, who has jurisdiction? Is it international or is it the Inuit? Who actually controls it? I know a lot of shipping is going to happen through that area, but like we have over here, we have like a 200-mile limit, I believe. But you already talked about it? Okay, I didn't come through the whole thing. But anyway, who controls that space that the ships are going to be going through?
All right. Excellent question. I think the Law of the Sea Treaty speaks to this. It's an international agreement that was brokered by the United Nations. I should quickly add the United States is not a signatory to the Law of the Sea Treaty. However, we behave in our actions assume that we are signatories to it. It has a lot of delineations. There's the 12-mile limit, there's 24-mile limit, the 200-mile limit, as you said, and there is also the continental shelf adjudication, which covers the surface area underneath the waters. The United States has lodged claims for its territorial limits, including last autumn for the continental shelf. These are being adjudicated through the United Nations Law of the Sea subcommittees, and we will see what happens. Parts of the waters are, or parts of the continental shelf, I should say, are still in dispute, notably the Lomonosov Ridge. Russia claims that, but Denmark has filed a claim on behalf of Greenland also for the Lomonosov Ridge. So it's in flux. In general, the United States believes in freedom of navigation. We believe in the right to sail through all the ocean's waters. However, we have certain restrictions that we have to abide by depending on how close we get to other nations' shorelines.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Thompson. Would you like to add on to that discussion here?
I would just add that I believe innocent passage, but you also bear the risk of creating a problem for someone else. So I think it's very important to take seriously where you're going and your preparedness for that area and who you're communicating with as you pass by. Having a good neighbor, knowing that they're working in the area, knowing what you're doing is very important. And it goes to the thread of all of our speakers speaking. You know, we work in these environments, we're going to remote areas. It's good to know who your friends might be and who you might need for resources, but also to be respectful, for them to know why you're there and what you're doing and what you're going to do with that information. So it's all about good communication, which has been a thread of all the things that we've talked about today.
Of course, absolutely. Thank you. Would any of our virtual speakers like to add on to that?
Yeah, I would like to reiterate what Paul just said. You're gonna need some people to do anything, as I mentioned before, in the Arctic. And also, as I pointed out, the first responders to any kind of emergency are likely to be the communities of the Arctic. Again, I can't emphasize that enough. I mean, we just recently started having a seasonal presence of the Coast Guard. As amazing as that is, I mean, I find it amazing we do not have search and rescue. It was one of the first concerns that we had as a company at Royal Dutch Shell when we started evaluating what we call a new country entry. We had to fly, I went up with other executives and had to assess out of Utqiagvik what was there that could possibly help us when something happened, because it's never if. Something always happens. Okay. It's how big is it? And this in oil spill, Jeremy can back me up. How big is it? When I was working oil spills in Alaska, we had 2,000 a year, 200 of which required my attention. So they happen all the time. It's not just oil spills, you know, emergencies, get personnel to get people like off the drill ship, the culloch that was going aground that I showed. So it is all about safety, search and rescue concerns. I think Paul's presentation, invaluable. The time he put in to explain how important that is. It's the first line of defense for anybody. For us as Inupiaq people, we're out there in open water, because understand in the Arctic, what you're really, the most precious resource there isn't oil, isn't even whales per se. It's not the wildlife, it's not the people, it's open water. We've got 94 days of it. Who gets to use that open water? At least on the US side. Now, if you go to the Atlantic side, they have a lot more open water, a lot farther north. But understanding that everybody is competing for that 94-day window. What can we do on the Arctic Ocean? That will include a lot more shipping, as everybody has mentioned, a lot more shipping, a lot more cruise ships. When I was with Shell, a German cruise ship showed up on the shoreline of Utqiagvik in the dead of night, which is the background here I have. This is midnight in July in Utqiagvik. Sun is high, same position it would be at 3 p.m., 3 a.m. And they lightered out. This is in, again, 2007. The tourists lightered from the German cruise ship, which showed up unannounced in the Arctic, and they came ashore on Zodiacs. I'm standing with the senior VP from Shell, watching the tourists march past us into downtown Utqiagvik. And when I say downtown, I'm talking about a village of 4,000 people. That is insanity. And I only say that story because, one, I like stories. Two, I think it perfectly illustrates that the people who know what's going on in the Arctic actually are the ones living there. Nobody else knew that that German tourist ship was there except us, the Inupiat people.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Mr. Altendorf, anything you'd like to piggyback off of with that?
I mean, I think everybody said it pretty well already. I just have to chuckle whenever I hear like the German boat example is cruise ship is a perfect example of the challenges. Situational awareness in the Arctic, anywhere in the Arctic and the globe, is challenging. It's slowly getting better, but it requires a significant input of money and resources. And if there's, if the bureaucratic mentality is the only constant in the universe. It's a thing I go back to every time. So it doesn't matter if it's government or a corporation or what have you. Nobody is going to be ready for the cost and resources of operating in this environment. And what I would tell any commercial vessel operation or any future mariner is that be prepared to self-rescue. Be prepared to initiate your own response. The communities will absolutely be there, but their ability to manage their own operations and infrastructure and et cetera is already challenged. And so that kind of influx it's just, the scale at which if something happens and how quickly we can get resources up there is measured in days, not even close to hours. So anyway, self-rescue, understanding your operating environment, understanding you're on your own, and that many of the vessels that transit through the Bering Strait also are on innocent passage, Unimac Pass, innocent passage. For Americans, I think it's challenging when I talk to folks in Nome or Reykjavik, and they see what's going on out there. They see who's underway. It's not a secret. And we have very little regulatory hook. The good news is the International Maritime Organization and the world's mariners are very serious professionals. There's lots of international cooperation and treaties that I think for the most part the global community follows, which makes me feel better. But at the same time, if something happens and they're not coming to a U.S. port, as a career regulator, there's not a lot we can do. We're going to have to spend appropriated funds to respond and support communities who will be on the front lines. And that's a challenge. It's certainly a challenge.
Of course, don't want to leave you out of the discussion. Dr. Koch, anything you'd like to add?
Sure. I just will quickly note that from the scientist researcher perspective that it is important to not to also know who is out and when and why in that kind of pre-open water season, and sort of coordination and planning in advance is very important, so that knowing how that shared space is being used and avoiding conflict. And one important coordinator in that space, I will say, is from IARPC, which the Interagency Arctic Research and Policy Committee. And so representatives from every federal agency that has interest in the Arctic, comes together through this forum to communicate, and they've now been doing these kind of pre-cruise, pre-summer season planning discussions, so that you can find out what agencies are doing what work and when they'll be out there on what ship, and that hopefully that there are opportunities to find synergies and work together, rather than having multiple ships up there doing similar things and unnecessarily, adding to the activity up there that doesn't need to happen. And so I think that's something to be mindful of. And then also another entity to be working with, like the Alaska Eskimo Whaling Commission. I know they do annual meetings before, so that they are aware of the ships that are planning to be up there doing work, and that they're not interfering with whaling season, and avoiding certain areas. And so I think in the future, whether whatever the law of the sea treaty, or those kinds of agreements say, there's another set of agreements that we need to make sure that we're all following and working towards, so that that shared space is not being overwhelmed and detrimental to the ecosystem and to the communities.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I'm actually going to hand the baton right back to you now and get started with our next question here. So during our time here with these individual speaker presentations, we've heard a litany of perspectives ranging from ecosystems, geopolitics, or indigenous communities, as well as national security and shipping. Now, here's the question. Where do you foresee this all going? What's the Arctic going to look like in the next 10 years? What's the largest threat that you might see coming down the pipeline? And more optimistically, what might all of this
I believe we may have lost the sound on you all for a moment.
Yeah.
Oh, can you hear me okay? All right, excellent. Let me ask that one last time. So, what might the Arctic look like in 10 years? What are the biggest threats that you foresee, based on your expertise? And what might all of this look like if we get it right? Scott.
Okay, sure. I would say 3 I's: ignorance, isolationism, and incidents at sea. I'm mostly interested in the first two. I think we're at an inflection point right now in terms of science and politicians. Many of you are practicing scientists, or you live and work in a field in which science dominates. We're seeing a moment in which politicians are questioning scientists. Assumptions that we've had most of our lives about scientific method have come into question. And the Arctic is an area that I think science ought to have primacy. I have a lot of respect for the scientific research that's going on, and if there was anything to fault scientists on, and I don't, but I think there has to be a better dialogue between scientists and politicians who make decisions about what happens. Maybe scientists should do more publications, should do more panel discussions like this, and talk in layman's terms so that politicians can quickly come up to speed on what the issues are. I know peer-reviewed journals are important, but I think public fora are also important. Second issue is isolationism. As you heard me say earlier, I think the United States is also at an inflection point. I embrace the idea of a multilateral Arctic and an Arctic of inclusion. I don't like the vision of a United States going it alone, and I hope that the forces that push for multilateralism will prevail over those who are inward looking at this moment and wish for a more US-centered approach.
Thank you. Ms. Gallagher?
If you follow the news, you can see that many nations are building icebreakers and exploring the Arctic waters. So they're doing it without cooperation necessarily, and it can be a confined space to operate, both from ice and just the topography of the navigational channels that you operate in. So there isn't a strong construction, a group to help sort of work out conflicts in advance. So I think when we talk about what does it look like in the future, I think it's going to be an area of higher congestion. I think it's going to be an area where risks of operation could create a huge problem. You can think about incidents where a cruise ship has an oil spill, or someone goes aground and we have to medevac, or there's a fire on a ship. Or if you look at what's happening in the trade lanes, liquefied gases are being transshipped through the Arctic as a way to sort of speed up the transit time. All these are huge potential areas where there isn't infrastructure for response. We've talked about lack of emergency response, lack of responders. So I think one of the areas of concern is, being prepared for an emergency. And I think we're a long way away from that. So I think more work has to be done, but things are happening. It's almost like we're trying to put a bunch of assets into an area that's not well prepared to receive them yet. So as we talked about before, more work needs to be done to prepare all the users and the communities to make sure no incidents happen. And that takes good, clear communication.
Excellent. Thank you. Now to our virtual speakers. What are the biggest threats?
Kick off, just to echo the trend here, our biggest threat is lack of international cooperation in the Arctic, period, full stop. Because of all the reasons we've already talked about, the treacherous nature of operating there. Up until recently, up until a couple of years ago, I think icebreakers were a focal point at the beginning of this discussion. They've been a focal point almost my entire life as a grown-up, through Senator Murkowski and now Senator Sullivan, fighting for icebreakers and the capability to respond to anything in the Arctic, and why that's important. And it's even more important because, and I believe this was mentioned already, but we've got up to 50 Russian icebreakers that up until recently we were actually counting on to respond to emergencies in the Arctic. And it's not if they're going to happen, it is when. I'm going to keep emphasizing it. There's not going to be an incident-free Arctic. No matter how safe you operate, something will happen, an oil spill, you know, it already has happened. Most of the oil spills I worked in Alaska were from cruise ships. That was the majority of the 200 that required my attention out of the 2,000 that we had every year in Alaska. And I'm sure it's more now than 2,000. This was quite some time ago. So I want to go back to what Paul said, how it really is dependent on safety and international cooperation. And actually the lack of international cooperation that started not just recently, but with the lack of participation from Russia, not only in response to Arctic emergencies, which again, I want to emphasize, we're relying on Russia. Working for an ex-national company like Royal Dutch Shell, I was hard pressed to find a map that had country borders, let alone communities on it. We really thought of regions as, you know, Russia is there, they've got icebreakers, they can respond to any emergency we have in the US Arctic. And it wasn't just us who thought that. Well, that came apart a few years ago with the Russian invasion in Ukraine. And then on the science side, we stopped talking to Russia, right? So we had to shut down the Arctic Council, which is, to Paul's point, possibly one of the organizations that could be a strong organizing influence and really bring about this international cooperation that is so desperately needed in the Arctic as we move forward over the next decade. That went by the wayside because Russia admittedly has most of the Arctic coastline. I mean, if we think I don't know that we really emphasize this enough at the beginning. The Arctic is an ocean surrounded by coastline. I know I'm stating something obvious, but sometimes it needs to be said. The Antarctic is land surrounded by ocean. It's dramatically different. So the fact that we no longer, or we're seeing an erosion of international cooperation for a couple different reasons, I think is our biggest challenge over the next decade. If we're only thinking in decades, that seems to be a very short time frame from where I come from. We tend to think in thousands of years. So as my uncle Edward Ida said, former mayor of the North Slope Borough, when we were negotiating conflict avoidance agreements, to Chelsea's point about how do we manage to do research and oil exploration and whaling. Well, we negotiate every year something called a CAA, conflict avoidance agreement. That happens every year. Everybody has to do it. That's how we manage our Arctic Ocean. And if we don't, there is a very high probability that, you know, these things will not occur. But we're the ones in Nupia came up with the idea of a conflict avoidance agreement, a CAA. And we've been doing it for decades now because we could see far into the future, back way in the old days in the 1970s, that this would be necessary. So I would say, to wrap up, if we had more international cooperation, the Arctic Council I was hopeful for that. I think others were. And also, again, look at the international cooperation models that have already existed for thousands of years in the Arctic. We have been trading among ourselves, Greenland, Canada, and Russia, for thousands of years.
Excellent, thank you. Dr. Koch, Mr. Altendorf, anything to add?
Sure. Yeah, I would say that one, with these marine ecosystem shifts underway are significant. And Jeremy had pointed out too this issue with these marine heat waves and the impacts that this is having on fisheries. So I think that there are some serious food security and economic issues staring us in the face, and how we prepare for those I think it remains to be seen and something that we need to be putting more effort towards. And then second, gosh, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, yes. Another thing that we haven't really talked much about yet is also coastal erosion being a major issue for the region, particularly with the loss of sea ice in winter months, as we saw in 2018, 2019 in the Bering Strait region. And you get these strong winter storms coming in, and the sea ice that usually acts as a buffer for that wave energy hitting the shorelines. We've got thawing permafrost, and it's just another disaster waiting to happen, and has happened in other communities. And now communities are having to face questions about relocation. And so I think those are two of the bigger concerns that I think about within from year to year in the next 10 years, like this is happening now. And I guess the thing that gives me hope, or that like if we get it right, I think that having more of that sovereignty and self-determination in the process, I think is very reassuring. And a lot of the engagements that I've been have shown this kind of growing force in making that happen, and kind of setting up these research stations or organizations locally, and so allowing for more community-based monitoring, and resources going directly to communities, and not having to just give dribs and drabs here and there from other federally funded projects. And so I think that moving more in that direction, I think would be a wonderful thing to see, and hope that that barriers start to fall for that.
And I'll just quickly add a couple things. What everybody else has already said is clearly, like, they are absolute challenges, certainly threats. I would like to see more, or at least better, federal level leadership on that is focused on Arctic issues. And by that I mean, like, one of the challenges I have working in the service, and even now in with the university, is competing with federal dollars, or not having like a real focused energy on Arctic issues, whether it's and I'm not just talking about the state of Alaska. Certainly Maine and the issues there in the Atlantic Arctic are the same, if not just slightly different. But the flavor of government is through the lens of Seattle, and I am forever just exhausted by trying to convince folks in Seattle, where the center of the federal government region for Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Alaska exists. Alaska is treated like an outpost in so many ways, and I will constantly push back on the notion that somehow Alaska and Idaho and Oregon and Washington State have the same challenges and issues and focus. It's just, it's ridiculous, quite frankly. It's preposterous that I have to compete, or I have to message through Seattle. And the challenges there is the repetition of agencies who send liaisons both from Seattle or from Anchorage, and there's not dealing with the federal government's hard enough, and we make it doubly hard when we deploy people to respond and to manage a disaster from the lower 48. And it's often people who have no clue about what's going on up here. So I don't want to sound, I don't want to overstate the issue. And I do think you don't necessarily need to live in Alaska to understand the issues here. But man, when it comes to policy implementation, we are not where we need to be. 10 years from now, if Arctic issues are somehow chopped away in the federal government, both civilian and military, where there's a focus across the board on that area that allows for singular leadership to break through these traditional communication challenges we have. I think that would be great, and I would love to see that in the long term, along with more infrastructure. The Port of Nome being a great example, better federal search and rescue capabilities on the North Slope, and all of those things are expensive and require significant policy implementation challenges. So, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much to all of our panelists here for the discussion. In the interest of time, I'm just going to ask one more quick little question here. Very, very briefly, any final pieces of advice for future mariners and working professionals that might be entering the Arctic?
Do they know that I'm coming?
I see that Senator King has joined us, so
Yes.
I will yield my time to Senator King.
Understood.
Thank you
for joining us.
Delighted to be with you. This is my third time joining this program, and I'm glad to be able to have an opportunity to chat. I just got off the airplane. I'm sorry that I was late. The plane was 3 hours late coming from Maine to Washington, but I'm here now. Let's talk a bit about climate change in the Arctic. The Arctic may be the best single indicator of the reality of climate change. Something like 70% of the ice in the Arctic Ocean has melted in the last 40 years, and the Arctic Ocean is suddenly open for navigation. At least what's called the northern route along the Russian side of the Arctic, and the Northwest Passage near Canada and the U.S. down toward Greenland is opening up a little more each year. It's important to think about what a amazing development this is. It's like the sudden discovery of the Mediterranean Sea. It's a body of water that has essentially been closed to human use, other than indigenous people and polar bears, for all of human history. And suddenly, in the past 25 or 30 years, it's opened up. So it raises a lot of issues, and of course, the reason it's opened up is climate change, and the issues that it raises are things like energy exploration, transit. As I mentioned, I think it's like 2 weeks shorter to go through the Arctic Ocean rather than through the Panama Canal to get from Asia to Europe. So it's going to be a very important transportation hub, if you will. And one of the reasons I've taken a special interest in the Arctic is that the first ports you get to, if you go through the Arctic Ocean on the U.S. side, are in Maine. So I see it as an opportunity for Maine, as well as an opportunity for the rest of the world in this region. Now, energy exploration is also a part of it. I will share a funny story. I was at an Arctic conference in Iceland several years ago, and there was about a 40-person delegation from China. And I thought, what in the world is China doing up there? And I talked to one of their delegates, and he said, well, we consider China a near Arctic nation. And my first response to that was, that means Maine is a near Caribbean state. It's sort of preposterous to argue that China is a near Arctic nation. They're a long, long way, but they're up there now very seriously. And they're doing joint exercises with the Russians, both military and scientific. And so huge issues in terms of both China and Russia. Russia is militarizing their Arctic shore, if you will. New bases, enlarged bases, aircraft, military, and that is of concern because in terms of aircraft and missiles, it's the shortest way to get to the continental United States from Russia. Now, until the invasion of Ukraine, there was an organization called the Arctic Council, which was made up of all the Arctic countries, including Russia. It expressly did not cover military affairs, but it covered pretty much everything else. And in fact, Lisa Murkowski, the senator from Alaska, and I went to a couple. I've been to several Arctic Council meetings. Unfortunately, the council essentially shut down when Russia invaded Ukraine, and they sort of dropped out. It's coming back to life. I think there's a meeting in May in Norway, I believe. And it's a very important organization for sort of managing the development of the Arctic. It's an opportunity to try to ensure that it's developed peacefully and responsibly. But without Russia, it's somewhat difficult. Norway is the chair. It's a rotating chair, and Norway is the chair this year. And this is an important development to get the Arctic Council back in business. The other importance, of course, is search and rescue. As I say, there'll be more transit, there'll be more people up there, scientific work. And so all of those are pieces of this very important, essentially new puzzle. Another issue is icebreakers. The Russians have something like 40, we have 1.5. We have one that's being basically used for parts, and the one that's functioning transits between the Arctic and the Antarctic. It's pitiful that the United States doesn't have more in the way of icebreaker assets. There's one or two, I think one under construction, but it's not really going to be new, because by the time it's finished in the next few years, the one that we're now doing, which I think is the Polar Star, is going to be retired. It's a very old ship and not in very good shape. So we are really slow and late to realizing how important the Arctic is. When I first arrived in the Senate, I was following Lisa Murkowski one day onto the Senate floor, and I had an interest in this area. And I said, Lisa, I want to be the Arctic senator. And she smiled and said, no, Angus, you can be the assistant Arctic senator, because this is something that she's been very engaged in over the years. And she and I meet periodically. We just met a week or so ago with a set of parliamentarians from Norway. And of course, Denmark has an important issue in involvement with the Arctic, because it's a sort of an odd relationship with Greenland. Greenland, I think the term might be semi-autonomous. Greenland has its own government and its own domestic policy, but it's under the aegis of Denmark for foreign policy and defense. And so Greenland, of course, as you know, is an important strategically. We have a major base up there that's been there for a long time. It was an Air Force base, now it's a Space Force base. And of course, you know, President Trump has made all kinds of noises about buying it or annexing it or invading it. And I don't know, I'd be surprised if that goes forward, but that's always to be considered. One of my most formative experiences here in the Senate was to go to Greenland about 6 or 7 years ago, and spend a couple of days up there with climate scientists. And we flew out over the ice pack, and number one, you can see the ice pack, you can almost watch it shrink. And there are these giant holes in the ice pack over the Greenland ice sheet that are called moulins. And we flew over, and you could, in a helicopter, and you could look down, and into these giant holes were rivers that looked like they were about the size of the Penobscot River, of meltwater pouring down into these holes, down through the ice. And one of the problems is that when that water gets to the bedrock, it lubricates the intersection between the ice and the rock, and accelerates the movement of the ice out into glaciation. Into icebergs. And as it basically accelerated the climate, the the melting of the Greenland ice sheet. There's about 20 feet of sea level rise in the Greenland ice sheet. To put it in perspective, there's about 212 feet of sea level rise in the Antarctic ice sheet. Essentially, the Antarctic and Greenland are the last remnants of the glaciers, the major remnants of the glaciers. And what people don't realize is when the glaciers were fully formed in North America and around the world 25,000 years ago, the ocean was 390 feet shallower than it is today. You could walk from Castine to Georges Banks. You look at a chart and you'll see wherever it's the water is shallower than 390 feet. That was dry land 25,000 years ago. As the ice melted, of course, the ocean rose, and also the land rose because it was so weighted down with ice it had been depressed. But that's a climate reality that we're facing, and of course there are ice sheets in Antarctica that are in danger of collapse, in which case we could see very rapid sea level rise, as opposed to the rather limited that we're seeing now. So that's a kind of wrap up of how I see the Arctic and its relationship to national strategy. And I agree with the prior speaker that we need to develop infrastructure up there. A deepwater port at Nome would be a place to start. My first visit to the Arctic was in a nuclear submarine under the ice during something called ICEX, which is an annual scientific study. And I spent a couple of days on the submarine, and then came up through the ice. It was pretty dramatic introduction to the landscape of the Arctic. So that's what I have for you today. But I'd be glad to take questions if you have any. We have finally pushed the Navy and the Defense Department to develop an Arctic strategy, which came out a couple of years ago, and it's not bad, but it's something that needs to continually evolve. And I think if I'd leave you with one thought, it's the concern about China's deepening interest in the Arctic and what that really means for the peaceful development of Arctic resources. I'll stop there.
Alrighty. Very much, Senator King. Anyone have any quick questions? Alrighty.
Yeah, I must have answered them all. I'm envious of is it Jareem? I'm envious of your Northern Lights behind you. That's pretty cool. I'm gonna speak to someone about that. Well, it's wonderful to be with you all, and congratulations on the conference, and congratulations on focusing on the Arctic, because it's enormously important and will only become more so over the next 10 to 20 years. Think about the idea that we suddenly discovered the Mediterranean Sea, but I would mention that it took about 1,000 years of war to settle peacefully the areas around the Mediterranean Sea. That's what we want to avoid. Thank you all very much. Great to be with you. And please keep in touch. And I look forward to being with the Academy in various ways. And congratulations on your new president. It's very exciting. I talked to him a couple of days ago, congratulated him, and met him when I was up there for graduation last year. So I'm optimistic. You're at one of the great places. I think Maine Maritime Academy is the biggest bargain in American education. I congratulate you and love what you're doing up in Castine. So thanks again. And now I think I've got a vote on the Senate floor in a few minutes. By the way, I would advise you, if St. Peter ever comes and says to you, you have 10 minutes to live, you should reply, could it be during a 10-minute Senate vote? Because then you'll have about an hour. Nice to be with you all. See you later.
Thank you, Mr. Senator. I'm now going to hand it over
Thank
to
you.
Mr. Campbell-Taylor here for our concluding remarks.
First, I'd like to thank everyone here for the questions and answering, for everyone who has asked questions and everyone here who has helped answer them, and for Chris Agaropoulos for his wonderful work moderating this. I'd like to thank everyone for attending this event. Our speakers today touched on key points on an ever-changing Arctic, one that informs the future of both our industry as a whole and the state of Maine. The discussion today was an insight into how the Arctic not only affects global policy, but the living people in the region. It's important that we in the maritime industry, who see our own work change due to a warming Arctic, understand the implications of the world we live in and how we impact the people around us. It's our responsibility as mariners to be informed about the seas we both work on and carry out industry over, since the search for the Northeast Passage to the voyage of our very own Bowdoin, the maritime industry has been at the forefront of how we understand the Arctic and how we learn about it. As we conclude the symposium, I invite everyone to consider the changing Arctic, not only in the context of your own lives, but through the lens of the people and species who make it their home. I'd like to give a final thank you to all our speakers and everyone who made this event possible. Following this, there will be a dinner hosted in Harborview at 1800. All are welcome and dinner is provided. Please meet us across the lawn, it says street here, at the MMA Dining Hall. You may go through the line in the dining hall and we'll convene in Harborview. The chefs have prepared some Arctic-inspired food for us to enjoy over continued conversation with our two speakers who are here with us in person. We appreciate your time and support. Everyone have a good day.